innovation for the SDGs. So this panel, we're lucky because we have two experts on financing sustainability, who also understand the scope of the challenges and the scope of the opportunities, what needs to happen to make the leaps of progress that we're going to need to direct capital toward better outcomes. Our first panelist is Andrea, the president of the Community Foundations of Canada, who works closely with over 190 Canadian community foundations and others around the world to advance the SDGs. And our other distinguished panelist is Benjamin Bellegy, who is the executive director at WINGS, which is a global network of 170 organizations supporting and developing philanthropy, giving, and private social investment in 50 countries. So welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. We have a short panel here, and the way we're going to organize it, I'm going to ask each panelist for their quick take on a couple of key questions. Maybe we'll have time to discuss them as we go. And Andrea, let me turn to you on this first question, which is, how do we accelerate the pace of funding to social purpose enterprises so that they can meaningfully advance the SDGs?
Super easy question, super easy answer. So thank you. I would also like to say hi to everyone. I don't know if there's any other fellow Canadians in the crowd, but definitely say hi in the chat box. I know you've had a great day so far. I'm going to be honest, it's 4:30 on a Friday. It is sunny and beautiful here in Ottawa, where I am calling in from. And so you're catching me at the end of the day. So I don't know how my answers are going to fly, but we're going to try it. Really happy to be here, and happy to be here with Benjamin, who I know really well because CFC is a member of WINGS. And so we've had the occasion to chat together many times and speak on some panels together. So thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this. And Matt, thanks for the question. Also, I love the artwork behind you. It is perfect for today. So I wanted to talk about a couple of things, really 5 things that make me think about this question and sort of the thought process that my mind goes through. So the first is that I don't think it's just about accelerating the pace of funding and financing. I think it's about completely changing how it's being done. And so there are 5 things within that I think about. One is I think about data. And so if there are other sort of data geeks here, you will know this, but I think that data is wonderful and so problematic. And it's wonderful because it gives you evidence and it gives you stories and it helps you understand, but it's incomplete most of the time. In fact, many of the ways in which data is collected, in particular here in Canada, it's problematic because it is based on a colonial system. It is based on a system that has systemic concerns embedded within it. And so the data is actually incomplete. And so I think if we are going to change funding, we need to change how data is collected, and that therefore how we analyze, how we go through the data, to be ensuring that it's more complete and tells a more accurate story of the lived experience of people and of communities. The second thing that I think about in this acceleration conversation is a shift from what often some people call a shift from charity to philanthropy, or a shift from charity to justice, meaning that charity in its definition is wonderful. It helps someone who needs it in that moment. But philanthropy or justice is about how do we ensure those moments don't actually happen. And I think that that's part of changing the system, that philanthropy, that social finance, that social purpose organizations operate within, and we can't lose sight of that. The third piece is better positioning the decisions around funding. So if we look at philanthropy or social purpose organizations in the world, I think that we will see that there is a shift into a thematic and an action around shifting power, or sometimes it's described as nothing about us without us. And it's really ensuring that decisions that are made within community are made by the people who live within that community, who are contributing to the ideas around change. And I think that that's an important element that we need to talk about in this acceleration, because I suspect if we do more of that, then the acceleration will be natural. The fourth is really talking about the different types of funding. You know, we often hear about funding that is short term, that is project driven, and that's just not the way that we need to be leveraging our resources currently. We need funding that is sustainable, long-term, mission-based as opposed to project-based, that really moves into transformational change as opposed to transactional short-term change. And a way to do that is to really adjust the ways in which we think of the types of investments, which I think is getting to the heart of your question. Is, you know, it's not just about grant making, it's not just about a donation, it's about investing in change. And so social finance is a place in which we're seeing a lot of growth and development here in Canada. On Monday, the federal government just released its 2021 budget, which is the first budget in 2 years. It's important because it is going to activate something that they committed to 2 years ago, but pressed pause on because of the pandemic. And that is a $755 million social finance fund. And so that is a way in which organizations, social purpose organizations, will have opportunity for sustained funding in a different way that is leveraging and utilizing different types of social finance. So I like your question. I just want to shift it a little bit to, let's not just accelerate it, but let's change the way that we're actually doing this work.
Well said. Thank you, Andrea. And Benjamin, maybe as modified by Andrea, how do you answer that question?
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think that's really a great way to put it, Andrea. And I mean, I agree that it's not about only acceleration, or it's not only about volumes of funding, for example, or resourcing. It's very much about how we transform that into something that is actually bringing about systemic change. I mean, that was actually a point I also wanted to make today. So very much agree with that. Of course, the volume question also is there, there is a potential here to think about, like, how can we increase the volume of resources and funding and sort of private resources for the common good, and more specifically for the SDGs. And there are ways to do that, actually. And I think it's something we tend to consider just as a fact, as like there is this amount of funding, or this this sector of foundations, or this number of donors in a specific country or region. But that can be hindered, or that can be supported by policies, by an enabling environment for philanthropy and giving, by an ecosystem of support that can help that kind of social investments to be made or not. So I think that is something that we need to consider, and that some funders can have a really critical role to play in developing, by not only thinking about how they can have the best possible impact as a single player, as an isolated actor, and trying to track that with data, with indicators, and etc., but also how they can contribute to something bigger than them, and really to building more philanthropic societies. That is also a way to build democracy, because if you support giving, if you support philanthropy, you're also building relationships, you're building trust, you're building engagement in society, and that is something that we need everywhere in the world. And so, yeah, I think that at the same time, we should not overestimate the role of philanthropy, in the sense that, that kind of resource is limited. It's, sometimes we say it's pool money versus sea money of governments or markets. And so that's the first element to have in mind. So that means it's not a negative assessment. Is just saying that means that limited amount of resources needs to be leveraged in the most strategic ways. And so that comes back to what Andrea was saying about sort of investing where we can make a change at the systemic level, influencing policy, and not just working very locally. So I think that there is, in terms of qualitative approach and how to unlock the effectiveness of that kind of resources, it's really about an articulation between local innovation and taking more risks than the sector usually does. That tends to be very risk averse. While on the contrary, it's maybe the only sector that has such a liberty and independency that allows them to take risks, to innovate, to fail, and all of that. But we need to change the incentives and the mindset, so we take more risks, we can innovate on the ground, but articulating that then with a more policy level, so that either working on scalable solutions and reflections with academics and with others and with other players on how these innovations, these approaches can be scaled, or influencing policy makers. And so that's I think the way we can really accelerate that kind of resourcing for the SDGs. And all of that takes strong platforms, strong ecosystems, and platforms that can bring together different sorts of players, and philanthropy being just one of the actors among many others.
Right, Benjamin. So you raised this, and Andrea is getting at it too. That we need to have a stronger ecosystem of support. Philanthropy can't be everything, of course, but it's an important part of that ecosystem. How do we build that ecosystem so that we get accelerated outcomes? I guess it's not. Do we wait for governments to do that? Do we? What's your take on that? And then Andrea, you could follow up there.
Sorry, did you want me to jump in on that question?
Sure, either way. Go for it. Yeah.
I think that fundamentally the approach that this is an all of us challenge and not a single sector or a single single individual or single organization or single sector challenge is really important. And I think that's why I also see the value in the Sustainable Development Goals, in that they are attempting to weave together a really important element of future that is about leaving no one behind. And the reason that I really like the SDGs as a way to bring the private sector, bring government, bring philanthropy, bring community members together is because, first of all, they're simple. It's 17, it's understandable, but they're all interconnected. And so they're all interwoven. I was on a call earlier this week that was talking about the intersection of climate change, migration, and gender. And one of the staggering statistics that was shared is that in the space of climate and in the space of gender, that the people who are most often displaced by climate change, to a factor of 80%, are women and girls. And so if we're approaching the SDGs with this interconnected or even intersectional lens, then I think that that's the space where more people see themselves in the solutions and as actors and contributors to those particular solutions. There's an incredible organization that I'm connected to, and mostly as a champion in Canada. It's based in Canada, but it's international, and it's called the Equality Fund. And the Equality Fund is all about changing the future for women and girls, but it's also about changing the way in which that is done. And so the Equality Fund comes out of an organization that has a long history in Canada and around the world, and who made the decision that they had to change how they were going to do their work in order to have a greater probability of success and a greater reach towards women and girls around the world. And and it was seeded with a $300 million investment from the Canadian government. There are other governments that are now coming to the table. Philanthropy has come to the table, including some of the most well-known names that are based in the US and around the world. There's also opportunity for corporations to come forward. And so this model of bringing together all of the different actors in different sectors in order to activate towards one SDG, but to really take that intersectional or interconnected lens across all of the SDGs. I think that's how we create a new economy. I think that's how we create a world where everyone belongs and where no one is left behind. And so when I look at the example of the Equality Fund, like I could talk about it for hours because I think it's so brilliant. It's not just about providing funding. It's about providing loans to women entrepreneurs. It's about how assets are invested and ensuring that they are done so with a gender lens, whether it's in traditional markets, whether it's impact investments, whether it's some other type of investment. And I think that the more in which we are taking this holistic approach to philanthropy, not to charity, but to philanthropy, I think that's really where we have opportunity. And I hope that that's where others see opportunity and see opportunity in the SDGs, which I think sometimes get a bad rap, especially when I'm talking to colleagues across the US of like, in some ways there's like some controversy. And I think really at their core, it's about how do we change the future for the better? And so the more that we can do that through different avenues, I'm all in on.
Yeah. So Benjamin, Andrea was talking about the importance of metrics and the cross-pollination of some of the SDGs. But a lot of people want to see evidence of progress. Like if you look at the SDGs, where do we prove the case that these kinds of philanthropic investments and government investments in advancing the SDGs can be the most successful, right? Because we've got to demonstrate, I think, to accelerate the progress, we've got to demonstrate in pockets where we can prove it up as quickly as possible. So where do you see, when you look at the SDGs, Benjamin, where do you see the best opportunities to prove the case?
Well, I mean, that's of course a difficult question because hierarchizing social causes and SDGs is not necessarily easy or even something we should do if we think from a sectoral perspective. I think each actor in the ecosystem will have its own role to play in some of these. But if we look at it from again from a sectoral perspective about the role of philanthropy and where we can help move the needle, I think the SDG 17 is a good example because this is the only truly transversal one. To Andrea's point, it's really about partnerships and about how do you bring different actors around the table to make all the rest happen. And I think that's probably one of the most critical role that philanthropy can play. Again, because it's not the amount of money that philanthropy can bring to the table that is going to achieve the SDGs. Even if we are successful in building an enabling environment and building a better culture of giving and creating incentives and having much more private resources flowing to the right causes and so on, it's going to make a lot of good, but it's not going to really reach the goals. So where philanthropy can really make a more systemic contribution, I think, is in its role as a catalyst and as an enabler and a connector, because it has, especially if you think from, for example, institutional philanthropy, it has the capacity to connect with business. It has the capacity to connect with families and with influence. And so it can bring together different actors. And again, it doesn't have these sort of rigid frameworks that forces them to work in a certain way, so they can listen to others and be that real bridger. So I think that's really one of the critical roles. And I don't think we've really taken on that role as we should as a field. And again, it will take that ecosystem we were referring earlier and these platforms. I mean, there is the SDG philanthropy platform that Wings is now hosting with the UNDP, the United Nations Development Program, we want these kind of platforms to be to develop in many different parts of the world globally, but also of course in different parts of the world, different countries, to bring about that collaboration and that cement that we need. So I wanted to highlight that. And the other one I wanted to highlight is maybe on a completely different note, is really about the, this climate action objective, which I think has, all the SDGs again are critical and are urgent and are interconnected and etc. But I think that on climate, there is an opportunity again for philanthropy to make a difference. Also because we're sitting on $1.5 trillion in endowments worldwide, at least. And so there's a whole, set of assets that we can leverage to invest that into climate friendly and climate mitigation and so on work. So that's an area where I think we have something to do, and we need to do it again collectively. And that's something that the field needs to do much more moving forward, working as a group, as a collective, foundations, together with other actors, with civil society, with with academics and so on, that they need to get engaged, including at a policy level. And so we're actually going to launch at the COP26 a bit later this year. We're going to launch an international commitment from funders on climate, that will actually target especially non-environmental foundations. So those who are not the experts, those who are not it's not their purpose to work on climate, but they will commit to aligning their investments when they have investments and endowments to sort of changing the way they work and their operations, and at the same time include the climate issue transversely in their portfolios. So I would say partnerships, and I would, on a more thematic level, I will highlight a bit this climate issue, which is really critical and where we can make a difference.
Yeah, thank you for that take, Benjamin. And Andrea, what do you think about that? He's calling out really the leadership of philanthropy to move out, to help on partnerships, and then having the climate goal, be a catalyzing force. What do you take on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that on the climate goal, I think it can be a catalyzing force. I think it's necessary. I think that sometimes we sit back in this comfort of saying, well, I'm a funder or I'm a philanthropist in a certain topic area, like affordable housing or social services. So therefore, I don't have to think about the environment because someone else is doing that. And I think that that's fundamentally incorrect. I think that we all have a responsibility and an opportunity to lean further into SDG 13, and in particular SDG 13, given the progress that is required and given the state of the world currently. And so the more that we can encourage those who don't put on a hat and say that they're an environmental funder, but can certainly be an actor in that system, the more that we can encourage that, I think that's a wonderful thing to do. I also think that, and there's some comments in the chat about philanthropy being honest with itself, right? In the same way that we all need to think about how our experience contributes to the work that we do, to our frame of mind, to the way that we think. Philanthropy in itself is rooted in gifts from wealthy people to be supporting those who do not have the same wealth. And I think that in Canada, this year in 2021 is the anniversary of the first community foundation. So it's a 100-year anniversary. And we're doing a lot of thinking about the ways in which philanthropy can perpetuate the inequities, the inequalities that we are actually claiming to try to address through our grant making and through our actions. And in part, that shows up in some of our practices, like our investments. It also shows up in the way in which we have accumulated wealth, Benjamin, that $1.3 trillion of endowments. That's not all in Canada, but in Canada through community foundations, we do have about $6.5 billion. And so we're really thinking about how that needs to change in the way in which we are an actor within the system. There are, in fact, some foundations who have started moving their endowments out of their historical spaces to support the development of something here in Canada that's called the Foundation for Black Communities, or the Indigenous Peoples Resilience Fund, because it's about shifting the power into the hands of those with the lived experience, with the community knowledge. And so I think that there's more that needs to be done, but the idea that philanthropy is just a space to make a contribution without making a change itself would be an incorrect statement for sure. We need to be looking both ways.
Yeah, and it harkens back to some of the earlier points you made, Andrea, about some of the changes on metrics was one of them, where how you collect the data and how important data is to driving change. Benjamin, can you speak to that point? In terms of your experience in running this network and how useful data is, and how it should be kind of reconfigured to accelerate change.
Well, I mean, I think it's a great question, and there would be a lot to say. We work on data, and we know that we need to have much more of that. But I just think that the conversation we're touching on was so important that I'd like just to also react to that previous point. Please, about this question of it's really the question of consistency, and I think that for us the key is really how do we break down the silos between, on the one hand, philanthropy or so-called philanthropy, on the other hand, business, the way you make money, the way you distribute the money, and we need to break down these silos and bring alignment across the chain. And the SDGs, again, are a good way to do that. But I think that, again, the role of philanthropy here, if we want it to be truly transformative and to be truly consistent, is to influence business, actually, rather than having business influencing philanthropy or telling philanthropy what it should fund. It should be the contrary, and philanthropy should help mainstream markets work differently and change the systems and change the rules of the game. So I think that's the only way that we could sort of counter the argument that philanthropy is not being honest or is not being sort of consistent. So I think that it's really it's uncomfortable. It's not easy, but I think that's really the only real way that philanthropy can make a difference in the world is by changing the system.
Thank you, Benjamin. And we have just 1 minute left. Andrea, any final comment?
I would just +1 on what Benjamin has just said. That was an excellent way to summarize.
Great. Well, I just want to say thank you, Andrea Dix and Benjamin Bellegy, for your leadership in this work. And that concludes this portion of the conference.